Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another edition of the xCollective. The xCollective is a monthly recurring podcast with founders, influencers, and important stakeholders in the start and scale-up ecosystem. Today's topic is about driving growth through a data-driven event strategy. And it's a pleasure that today I have the privilege to be sitting here together with Patrick de Laive, co-founder and CPO of The Next Web. Patrick, great to have you here.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me.
Of course.
It's super fun.
Yeah, very much looking forward to this session. And it's very relevant also given the fact that the Next Web conference is coming up in a couple of weeks. I'll be happy to hear a bit more about that. But before we go into depth on the topics to address today, Patrick, would you be so kind to elaborate a bit on your background and specifically also what keeps you up at night and your role within the Next Web, please?
Yeah, my name is Patrick de Laive. Indeed, you pronounced it in the correct manner, which is rare, I must say.
I was a bit hesitant, but happy to hear I did it well.
Anyway, so I'm the co-founder and CPO of TNW, The Next Web. Started the company back in 2006. Before that, I studied financial economics in Rotterdam. And before that, I was a stockbroker at the stock exchange here in Amsterdam where we still had open outcry. That's why my voice is a bit hoarse. It's still, it's 20 years or so later, but still
Scars
hoarse.
remain.
Scars still remain indeed. But I was at that moment, I think, the youngest trader at the exchange, and it was not very healthy for my voice and my body. So I decided to study and moved to Rotterdam. Studied indeed financial economics, and when I finished that, I was kind of like, normally you would become a M&A banker with my background or at least the study that I did. But I wasn't really interested in that. I wanted to do something online, which now is kind of like the default. People that are finished with their studies, you want to be where the action is. Back then, there was no action online. You can pay online. You can. There were a couple of websites, but that was about it.
It seems like a different life, but it's actually quite recent still.
Yeah, I mean, it was 15 years ago. It's not that long ago, but a lot has changed, of course. Anyway, so I started to work with my partner, Boris Veldhuizen van Zandt. We first did a few other things online and then basically started a small event we called it The Next Web. And that event was in 2006, 280 people in a church here in Amsterdam, very close by this address where we're sitting now. And it grew out to pre-COVID, 15,000 people here in Amsterdam. So that was
incredible.
It was a great ride. And of course, the company also grew alongside with it, and we started to do a lot more than just events. Mm-hmm. You said what keeps me up at night, to be honest, it's my kids. I can't sleep because they keep me up. They wake me up. I have two kids, adorable creatures, 4 and 6, and that's a big part of my life.
Of course. And on the side, you're running The Next Web together with Boris.
and I have also a nice. I haven't been playing sports for, I think, over 20 years or so. Since a year, I started playing padel. And it was kind of like, I fell in love with the game, and I tried to do as much as possible. So.
Nice. Cool. Well, I gladly like to hear more about this incredible story about The Next Web, how you started super small scale and scaled it into, I would say, the leading tech ecosystem, maybe globally, with 50,000 participants to the conference. Obviously now part of the Financial Times. Let's dive into that subject in a bit. But before we start, maybe as a teaser, a few statements that I would like to ask you to either say true or false, which are a bridge to the content that we will address.
Perfect.
First one. Start and scale-ups underestimate the value of an effective event strategy.
in general true.
All right. Then, is it true that events are not as measurable as, for example, performance marketing is?
True.
In the post-COVID era, there was a whole new set of opportunities to capitalize upon for creative marketeers.
That's also true, I would say.
Nice, that's a strike. Cool. Then you already told us a bit about how the Next Web originated and where it came to. Let's say pre-COVID. Could you elaborate a bit in slightly more detailed steps on the journey that you guys embarked on?
Yeah. So in 2006, it was just kind of like we were not event organizers, so we just organized an event because we had a different product that we wanted to show to the world, and we couldn't afford to go to an event. There was nothing going on, but there was an event in the US, and they charged $30,000 for startups to present themselves there with a small startup booth. We couldn't afford that, so we decided to organize our own event. And I mean, I had never been to an event myself, or a B2B at least. Of course, a festival left and right, yes, but not to something where you do business. So we just organized whatever we thought was interesting and fun, and without having any background in it.
Yeah.
And I mean that went on quite a long time without turning it really into a business. So I think it took until maybe 2009 or so that we decided, okay, this is something we want to pursue. We want to turn into a business.
So it took you about 3 years. You did it as a side thing, hustle, basically, until you actually decided, okay, this is serious. We're going to make a business out of this.
Yeah, and then when that decision came along, I think a year before that, in 2008, we started a media outlet as well, thenextweb.com. Nowadays, it was back then thenextweb.org, writing about technology and startups and the role of startups. The word scale-up didn't exist at that moment. So we were already kind of like engaging in other ventures than events. And in 2009, I think we hired a new editor-in-chief, and we started growing the media outlet and also the team. So I think we were back then maybe with 5 people or so.
Okay.
Started building also some of our own software in order to run our events and run our media site. And to then fast forward, everything started growing. The team started growing as well. I think in 2015 or 16 or so, we were maybe with 25 people, and then we decided kind of like, okay, we should go big or go home, basically.
Yeah.
And that's when we decided to branch out also we were a strong brand and people were asking us all kinds of things, but we were not necessarily having services for that or charging for it. So we basically added 2 new what we call business units, basically. One was office space in the heart of Amsterdam. So we opened a large office that we rent out to startups and scale-ups to bring the ecosystem to the office, basically. Yeah. You could say a local WeWork, maybe for the people that are familiar with WeWork, and then a bit better run, I must say, or not. I mean, I have a lot of respect
Free
for them, but
and
a lot happened. Yeah. And we added TNW programs where we work with governments and large companies in order to help them to innovate faster. And that's often where we connect startups in our ecosystem with, the likes of the listed companies that are looking for certain technology and can't find it. And we we put them together in a room, and then the pilots happen, and everybody's happy.
So basically, the brand that you guys build out organically and the whole community around it has turned out to be your key competitive advantage.
Yeah.
And from there on, you've listened to requests and needs from your community, and basically build ancillary services and products on top.
Yeah.
That allowed you to create new revenue streams and grow the business.
Yeah, and in the end, of course, the whole idea was that media should help events to grow. A program should help events and media to grow.
Yeah.
And everything should feed off of each other. So
yeah.
And yeah, that at the top we had about 110 people, which was pre-COVID.
Yeah.
So that and we sold the majority of the company to the FT that became a partner in 2019 or so. And the Financial Times, that was, of course, I mean, if you would have asked me 15 years ago, would the Financial Times be interested in TW, I would laugh in your face. But yeah, no, it's a big compliment, I guess, to the team and to everybody who's been working on it, and even all the people that have been working at TW now work somewhere else. It's the first Dutch, you could say, media events company that is sold to one of the big three media companies in the world. So that is a great achievement. So the COVID hit.
I was about to say, because you were specifically speaking about pre-COVID, then COVID hit and a lot changed, and I really admire the resilience that I saw within the organization, and how you guys recovered from it. And I think this is very inspirational. Also, could you quickly run us through how you went about restructuring the business from there on?
Oh yeah, it was. It did hit us in all kinds of levels.
Of course.
Events is clear. Media is also. People freeze their marketing budget for 3 months, 6 months easily. So that was also had a hard time. Office space. Well, we are in flexible office space. That's the whole idea behind TW Spaces, that startups should come in with 2 people, grow to 40 and leave. But if a pandemic hits, you can also just say kind of like, we're leaving, and there's a short-term contract. So that was also hit, although that came back very quickly actually. And on the program side, it was more like there was some uncertainty with large corporates, kind of like, should we invest more in innovation or less? And there was more of a hiccup. And the answer now is clear, and it's more, invest more in order to be resilient. But we had to, we had to change our strategy on the events side, of course. We had to change all kinds of contracts and renegotiate with all kinds of partners and our the people that are renting or the startups that are renting offices, etc. So it was not a fun year, and we also did a reorganization of the team.
Yeah,
that had to be done, although we took the time in order to see if it would blow over.
Exactly.
And that was also, I think, something, that it's great that, we have the Financial Times, and they just said, like, don't worry, we're here.
Yeah, exactly. You have
the
backing of a large
for 188
organization.
years. We back you, and please don't fire everybody before we know where this is going. And in the meantime, we also helped the Financial Times with their digital event strategy. So that was also cool.
Yeah, so great synergies there between the company that acquired you and the skills and the
I do think we can do a lot more together. But the COVID didn't help. Also not in kind of like getting closer to each other because everybody had their own
thing to fight for.
Yeah,
yeah, I can imagine.
But yeah, so after so we reduced, I think, to about 75 people. We're now at 85 people.
Would you say you're in a better position now than you were pre-COVID?
Not yet.
Not yet.
No, and that has to do. I mean, that is the main thing is still here. That there's uncertainty about events in the future. We had to make a decision on our 2021 event, which is coming up in 3 weeks or 2 weeks.
Yeah.
We had to make that decision in November last year. What are we going to do? Normally we're in June, and we said 2021 June, who knows?
Yeah, it's a crystal ball.
Nobody knows. So we said let's move it to October, and we had to decide on it's kind of like building a whole village with a lot of investment. There's a multi-million euro investment that goes into an event like that.
Yeah.
And so we decided on for 2021 kind of like a slimmed down version of our normal event in person plus digital. So where we had 15,000 people in 2019, we now have 4,500 capacity.
Okay.
And that has to do with international travel restrictions. You don't know. People can decide for themselves fairly easily if they want to go on holiday or not. Mm-hmm. But as soon as there's an extra layer involved, say a company you work for, then the company is also responsible for you. So
it becomes more complex.
It becomes so complex.
I understand.
Some companies are really open because they see kind of like, hey, and that's what we're seeing right now. We see the world is opening up again, and companies that we were talking to 2 months ago that said no, we can't attend anything in 2021 are now calling kind of like saying we want to be there.
Yeah, exactly.
Because they see that their competitors are there, and their peers and their partners. So things change so fast. But I would say when we get more clarity from the government, hopefully very soon, then the outlook for 2022 looks brighter.
Yeah, exactly. And I was about to ask, you are obviously in the midst of the storm and really, eyes and ears, I would say, of this whole tech community. Regarding the topic of today, and that is hosting and managing events and how to leverage that for your growth strategy. What are some of the latest developments and trends that you are seeing that are relevant to share? Because everybody's looking how to capitalize on this opportunity as the world is opening up again. But what are the things to consider and potential opportunities and risks that you see?
Yeah, I think if we go back a year or so, a year and a half, and then, with digital events coming along, and then everybody jumped on it, also a lot of B2B companies, it has become much harder than ever to get people into digital events.
A bit of fatigue.
A bit. There's a lot of fatigue. But, I mean, it's still doable. So I think you basically have a couple of things in an event strategy that you can think of. You have your owned events and third-party events, and then you have the formats. So from webinars that are also in terms of events nowadays, to full-on conferences with multiple speakers, multiple stages, etc. Mm-hmm. And I think it really depends on your current position in the market, what you stand for, what your strategy is, etc., in order to find the right balance between owned and third-party events and the formats that you're using. But what this pandemic did is it did make or it did give an opportunity to companies to create a full-on content and content strategy where events is basically part of a content strategy. So you see that larger or scale-ups are becoming also their own kind of like small media entities.
Yeah.
And media entities are becoming their own services company. So
It's
you
blurring.
see, those, yeah, it's converging, I would almost say.
But at the same time, you mentioned in one of the first statements that currently start and scale-ups are not utilizing events to the full extent. What is your observation there?
Yeah, I just think some are doing it really well, and some are not doing it at all because they don't know or know what to do with it, or they don't have the people, or what you often see, especially with B2B scale-ups and startups, is their growth strategy is mainly performance marketing. And every now and often also content marketing, but then is more in written content and creating funnels that lead to downloads, etc. But yeah, they're not necessarily coming from an events background or haven't seen the power of events. So it really depends on the company. I've talked to companies that were bringing 95% of their clients, pure tech company, 95% of their clients came through events.
Yeah, I think it can be a very effective part of your growth strategy, also in B2B, maybe even specifically in B2B.
Yeah.
But one of the key points of resistance that we tend to get if it relates to events is that it's time intensive and it's hard to measure the results.
Indeed, yeah.
You said that events are less measurable than performance marketing, which I think is obvious because performance is 100% data and continuously optimizing. But how to make sure that you can have a data-driven approach to events? You are obviously a best practice example yourself. Could you elaborate a bit on tips and tricks to?
Yeah, let's take an example that I'm just. I'll come up with an example not about my company. It's not a real company, but say you have a fintech company.
Yeah.
You do payments. You know that personal connections are important to you. So, but you're also a transactional driven company. So you need to win the trust of a customer. They implement your software, and as of that moment, you start to make money on that customer. You have a strategy in order to bring in those customers, but the last mile of bringing those customers in is face to face, and for the larger customers, it's also the first mile in order to build that trust. Mm-hmm. So you have a strategy of kind of like, this is who we are, this is our service, this is how we do our advertising business, this is how we try to generate leads. And then the strategy for events should be on top of that, is the same the same way that you do your online performance marketing. Mm-hmm. You do that at your events, and those can be events that you host yourself or a third party. But then the most important thing is that you measure it. You say it's time consuming, true. So you know how much you're going to spend, but you can say, let's say we're going to spend $1 million on events this year. It's fairly large marketing budget for events for scale up.
But it's a hypothetical figure.
Hypothetical. But you just raised 80 million, so that's fine. And so then you have your Salesforce or HubSpot or whatever. You need to make sure that you train the people that go to events, to train them. If you talk to somebody, this is how you put it into Salesforce. Tag them with the correct event where you met them, so we can measure over time. It's not gonna pay back immediately, but we can measure 6 months, 8 months from now where that lead went to.
Exactly. So in order to bridge the gap basically from offline to online, you need to train your people and have a protocol in place to actually extract that data into the CRM.
Yeah, and if you do it well, then you train a group of people that can attend your events at several places, and always have the same structure and can improve on that. Then you'll see that which events are working for you, because not all events are created equal, of course.
Exactly.
And based on that, you can make a decision. Next year, we're not gonna do this event. We're gonna try a new event.
Yeah.
And I think that is something we hardly ever see. Some companies do it, but not enough, I would say.
So what you're saying is that actually the same principles that apply to performance marketing, where you do A/B testing, test different messaging, test different formats, is also something that you can in a very structured way apply to hosting events.
Yeah.
Either attending them or owning them yourself.
Yeah.
So you just spoke about a case where there's an in-person event, high touch, very curated to a specific audience, typically smaller in volume, but more intensive in the program structure of the event, which you actually used as a tactic to accelerate deals in the pipeline, bottom of funnel, let's say. What would be metrics to judge the performance of such an event?
I would say is one is the number of leads, two is the qualification of those leads, and over time, of course, you want to see return on investment. So that the leads that you picked up during that event need to convert into customers. For payments company, the customer acquisition cost can be, especially of a larger one, could be like 10,000 euros or so, or 50,000 euros for that matter. If you want to rake in the Bijenkorf as a customer, those are clients, but the revenue you make out of it are in the millions per year. So
exactly,
it pays
off.
Yeah, it really, the metrics that you work with, your customer acquisition cost. The higher the customer acquisition cost, the better B2B events work for you.
Yeah,
that's kind of like, I think, the general rule. But I think there are multiple reasons why events can work for you. Sorry. So lead gen is basically bottom of funnel. You also have thought leadership. So say you have a great company and it goes super well, but the leadership team is not so well known, and you want to be quoted in all kinds of newspapers, etc., because that helps you with your recruitment, with raking in new customers, etc. So you want to be a thought leader in your field.
Yeah.
That's also a reason why events can work. But that's more top of the funnel.
Yeah,
right?
And especially also towards talent is a specific goal that we see nowadays quite often, because the telemarket is so competitive. That can also be a goal. It doesn't necessarily need to be geared towards end customers. Positioning yourself as a thought leader can also work to boost your employer branding, and become more attractive towards candidates.
Yeah, we in general, all the companies that we talk to, it's either thought leadership, it's branding, employer branding, or lead gen. Exactly. Those are the four reasons why why they want to work with us, or that they have in their mind where they want to grow.
But then you discussed like bottom of funnel lead generation, a structured protocol to put it in the CRM, and then to measure in retrospect what leads converted into deals, or at least downstream in the funnel. That is quite measurable and understand and easy, I would say, to track relatively.
Yeah.
But what about thought leadership and brand awareness goals? How to measure that? Because that is way more intangible. What are best practices there that companies can apply?
Yeah, so I think it's harder to measure indeed, but you need to measure it over time. One of the things how you can measure it is kind of like how often are we quoted in the press, or how often did we got coverage in the press. That is one thing, but also, for instance, if you have a content strategy, you can also look at kind of like the number of readers at your on your own blog, basically. And is that growing or not? So you make a certain investment, and it's blended a little bit, because you might also do some paid advertising in order to drive traffic to the blogs, etc.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's not 100% measurable, although you could say people that search for it are searching for it because of, they heard you somewhere or they see you somewhere. So there, you have to find a formula, kind of like what are we attributing to this to this branding budget, basically. And I think there also work with the right tools in order for communications, so that you always have the same process.
So a structured way of measuring the output of a set of activities.
And then it doesn't really matter what the formula is in the end, as long as it's the same formula you're using.
Yeah, exactly. But I think that's a very practical and very important insight. That if you measure, you need to be consistent in how you measure the performance over time, and then only you can assess whether a set of activities actually pay off, right? Because I think with events, it's always a confluence of content times physical presence at an event, including the whole campaign that was set up in order to create awareness for the event, which is then maybe supported by paid advertising in order to reach the eventual goal.
Yeah, and I mean, of course, people love to measure everything, but it also depends a little bit on, how much are you spending on certain things. Do you want to measure it? Because sometimes the cost of measuring is higher than the cost that you spend on the activation itself. So
I think that's a very interesting comment, to be honest, because indeed, everybody's looking to have a data-driven approach to everything, but in the end, marketing is also a lot about understanding your audience and a bit of common sense on really empathizing with your audience and then seeing what makes sense or not.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit of the old school thought, but why do some people advertise become a shirt sponsor of a soccer club? There's no way to measure the impact of that in an ROI. There's just no way. But they do it because it makes sense. It makes sense. Yeah. Otherwise, nobody would walk around with shirt sponsors. But yeah, so I think that goes for various things, maybe even TV commercials, although those are more expensive. So there you do see kind of like that people try to measure like the number of searches on your brand around a TV commercial, for instance.
Exactly. So you find proxies basically to measure the results. And you spoke about owned events and third-party events. Could you quickly stipulate maybe the difference between the two and what the pros and cons are of both, and how you would how you see a best practice to integrate both into an effective event strategy?
Yeah, so owned events are the events that you organize yourself, of course, and then you do the whole thing yourself. And third-party events are events where you go to buy tickets to, or sponsor, or partner with. Like the Next Web. Like the Next Web, for instance. And where it is, so the con of owned events is a lot more time-consuming. And that's, on the other hand, the pro of a third-party event. Third-party events are often bigger, but I think the main thing for startups and scale-ups, if you think about owned events, is owned events you can use owned events really well for your current customer base and the people that you already have in your CRM. So clients, but also prospects and
deals
whoever,
in the pipeline. Yeah.
And for that, it works. It can work really well. They're often also smaller, so you can go more in depth, and basically use owned events to pull somebody through the pipeline.
Yeah,
and deeper in the pipeline,
like an acceleration tactic.
Yeah, and then and third-party events are also, on the one hand, is a bit of branding, but also to reach a new audience and a new pipeline. I think that is also, especially with COVID, etc. Everybody was like, "Hey, everybody can work from home, etc." What you see. So some companies, of course, if you're on the e-commerce side of things, then you don't know where to get the stock from in order, because it was sold already before you got it.
Yeah, exactly.
But B2B software, the pipelines are kind of like what we hear are drying up, because everybody is used to working from home and used to Zoom, etc. But in the end, face-to-face can be an accelerator for the pipeline.
Exactly.
And there's no face-to-face. So it takes in many instances it takes longer to get a client in. And in the beginning of the pandemic, all the companies were like, "Oh shit, we have to digitize." So they ditched a lot of tools, and then they brought in a lot of tools. So that was kind of like paradise for every B2B company. But now I think you'll see that, people are looking for, okay, and now what? How are we growing the business? Because just Zoom doesn't suffice anymore.
Especially not in the enterprise segment, of course.
Yeah, indeed, it really depends on where you are or what service you have. But the more or the higher price you charge for your tool, the better face-to-face.
Yeah, and I think in-person events now also can be a key differentiator, because everybody's leaning towards a more digital strategy and inside sales tactics. And then if you can now host well-organized in-person events, that might be a key differentiator compared to your competitors and maybe leaning a bit more towards digital strategy.
No, yeah, sure. I mean, in the coming months, I think the first thing you'll see is that everybody is happy to go back and meet people in person. I was at the Formula One event, and of course that was just an amazing event, and they organized it under so much pressure, and
it was
so much uncertainty, but you saw 70,000 smiling faces. And people that were so happy to be out, and of course you could say it's not a B2B event, but a lot of it is B2B as well. And I was in one of those villages, and that's pure B2B. Yeah, I've seen in one day more people than in the past 1.5 years. So it works, and
sure it does.
And then everybody is, of course, full on energy that it's possible again, and it was nice weather, etc. But it shows that that it's important to see people again. And
exactly. Yeah. Well, we spoke a bit about the importance of an event strategy and how you integrate it into your content strategy and how it all ties together with different marketing tactics that you apply. It's never a standalone tactic, essentially. We also spoke a bit about different approaches to events depending on the goal that you want to achieve, either top of funnel, brand awareness, or thought leadership, or as a pipeline acceleration tactic, like you mentioned, like high touch in-person events. Different formats, so either owned or third-party events. Very practically, what are very basic do's and don'ts in organizing events that you can share with the audience? people that want to start building their event strategy? What are actual do's and don'ts? Very simple.
It sounds simple, but it's not an easy question. I think in the do's and immediately also in the don'ts is, if you organize an event, you should be very well aware of what you're organizing and be part of that. So if you're if I would organize an event on biotech or nanotech, I don't know anything about it, so it's deemed to
fail.
To fail.
Yeah.
So make sure that the do is kind of like figure out who you are, who your customers are, and organize something that is of interest to them. And maybe the biggest do is think about what they like, what they would want to see, or if you are in their shoes, right?
Yeah.
You get an invitation. What triggers you to say yes or no? I think that there's a whole strategy and psychology behind it. For some events, you want to be part. Others, you couldn't care less.
Yeah.
And there are so many events.
It really needs to touch the fiber. You really need to emphasize with your audience and touch the fiber of what they want to see. So really understand their pain points and their benefits that they are looking for in an event, essentially.
Yeah.
The whole value proposition, essentially.
Yeah, the value prop is of course super important, but I think overlooked by a lot of organizers.
Mm-hmm. And then you mentioned goal setting.
Yeah, goal setting is important. So depending on if you're a startup or scale up, and I think actually everybody who is attending events, even if you just buy a ticket, take an hour, write down, what do I want to get out of this event, and go for that goal.
Mm-hmm.
So this can be done on personal level, on company level, or team level. So that's super important, and then look back at it, measure. And so if it's at company level, you have goals, and then you need to know how you're going to measure that. Kind of like we had X number of meetings. Those meetings should all be in our CRM, so we can track where we met those people.
Exactly.
And we can track whether it was a new contact or somebody we already had in our pipeline but accelerated the deal. And then come up with a formula that weighs the value of these touch points.
Yeah. Cool.
And measure it. Yeah.
And what is a single mistake that is made most often that you see going wrong?
I think a lot of people think it's easy. And because of that, they kind of like don't really think through why people would show up. If you look at owned events, are most of the time free. And then because it's free, people think people show up. But in the end, what you're asking is you want time from your customers or your attendees, and time is valuable.
Yeah, no.
So even if it's free, it might not be enough, and you see very high no-show rates. And you have to think about that, and make sure that if you wouldn't organize it yourself, you would also want to be there.
Exactly. Okay, cool. And as a final remark, is there anything else you would like to share with the audience? Maybe a lesson learned that you, scaling up the next web, or any practical advice regarding organizing and implementing events in your growth strategy. Can be anything. Is there anything that you would like to share? The golden nugget from Patrick.
The golden nugget. I think for if you're running a scale up, don't underestimate the power of events. See it as true part of your marketing strategy. And also address it like that. So if you have a CMO who is 100% purely performance focused, then make sure that he or she hires somebody who understands kind of like events in that case.
Exactly. So you cover the full spectrum, basically, of instruments that you have at your disposal.
And I think, use events and communications, I would say, almost should be part of the marketing.
Nice. That's a good piece of advice. Thank you very much, Patrick. It was a pleasure to speak with you, and very much looking forward to the next session. Thank you very much for paying attention. Hope you found it useful. If there is any practical insights or questions that you may have, you may always shoot us an email, and we will make sure to follow up with Patrick for any advice. And please do not miss out on the next web, which will take place on the 30th of September until the 2nd of October.
First of October. Second, we'll still have some parties here.
Wrap it up. Yeah, exactly. So don't miss it out, and check out the website of the next web for any information. Thank you very much, Patrick, and thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Cool.